Jen, thank you for joining me this morning. When I thought about capturing discussions with leaders that I respect, I thought of you immediately. And I thought, especially in the context of this crisis, I'm like, who better to have us talk with than Jen Tejada, the leader of PagerDuty? We are customers of yours, and I'm
Thank
so
you.
thankful that I almost never use your product.
We hear that a lot.
No, and I say that because the only time PagerDuty does cross my mind is in those rare instances when something really bad is happening. So thank you for the service. But tell me a little bit about, am I thinking about PagerDuty correctly, that it is a crisis tool, or is
It
that
is.
too limited?
No, it is. PagerDuty was designed for IT-centric crises, and our first customer base was the developer community because as the world moved to the cloud and as the world shifted to life happening in analog bricks and mortar to life happening in the digital virtual world, technology became the underpinning for most companies and brands to achieve revenue and customers and drive customer experience. And so when something goes wrong with that complex technology that sits behind your brand, if you're Peloton or your DoorDash or your Netflix, particularly in this time when we're all staying at home, it's a really big problem for the company, the brand, the revenue, because the customer doesn't give you multiple chances to get it right. You screw up, they find an alternative. And what we found was these issues that would pop up due to technology were time sensitive, they're mission critical. For the people who are responsible for these issues, it's very stressful because these technology workers who we call responders know that every second that goes by, the company's bleeding reputation, bleeding revenue, potentially creating dangerous situations depending on what the technology is used for. And so there's a huge emotional component associated with managing a crisis. And we certainly see that as leaders given COVID-19 because it's a vast crisis. The duration is unknown. It's unpredictable in its nature. And all these things are true for a technology person or a responder. We're trying to resolve an incident. And one of the things I learned from PagerDuty and from our developer community within PagerDuty is that empathy is so important when responders are working through a crisis, whether that's a short-term crisis or a long-term crisis. And I've seen that in my own leadership style, a need to just really lean in hard to empathy first, get a sense for how people are doing, how they're feeling, both from what they'll tell me, what I need to interrogate for, but also what I need to see in body language, in their general demeanor, because you need to know if they're ready for what's in front of them.
One of the things I really liked that you highlighted there was the one, prevention, and then the importance of the responders. Right.
Yes.
A lot of the questions that I know you and I both got from analysts and others were, so what tools are you using? What's the technology?
Yeah.
What's the process? And so few questions were around the people.
The people.
That's fascinating. So as you look at the tactics that you're deploying, both through technology, but also the people part of it, what have you specifically done? Like, how has your world changed in terms of your approach? And you talked about being more empathetic, but what are some concrete things that you've changed?
Well, I'll start with recognition. Just the fact that you, as a leader, need to recognize and see people for what they're going through and how every single person in your organization or in your customer's organization may be experiencing this differently. So you cannot make assumptions. You cannot generalize on what's going to work for people. And in the case of, the responder environment, one of the things we're not talking about more broadly in the market is that the IT professionals of the world are the invisible frontline workers because they've left their network operations centers. They've left the comfort of their team sitting next to them where they could collaborate and resolve in person. They're now dealing with all the same issues you and I and our colleagues are in working from home, but they're still having to respond to these real-time issues, et cetera. And you can't see them, so they're not getting recognized and rewarded. So recognizing every person in your organization for how they may be experiencing this crisis, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And when you think of the things that come naturally to you, or the intuition you have on treating people a certain way, embarking on certain investments, what sources do you tap to increase your playbook, right? You do a lot of things naturally, but who do you share with? Who do you learn from? What's your approach to that?
It's a wide variety of diverse sources. My own experience, I'm a mom and a CEO and a wife. So I tend to approach things with maternal care in some cases. So it was very natural for me to lean into employee health and safety and well-being as a first priority. And so some of my friends who are mothers I've actually talked to about, how to think about caring for our younger employees who are maybe out in the world for the first time and experiencing this and away from their families. There are other CEOs that I've compared notes with that really are a diverse set of people. Fabrizio Freda, who is the CEO of Estee Lauder, where I serve on the board, runs a 50,000 person company with another 50,000 contract employees. And their business is largely driving a lot of growth in China and Asia. So they had a very early view on the crisis. So Fabrizio has been a tremendous mentor in helping me look forward at what's coming that I may not hear from my SaaS CEO compadres, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jen, what if you had to give the viewers some advice on how to distinguish between a problem and an inconvenience?
Yeah.
When things are fast and furious, everything looks like a problem.
Yes.
But they're not all problems. So what are some tips you would give somebody?
Well, we have a saying at PagerDuty, forward and outward, because oftentimes inconveniences can mask them or disguise themselves as problems when you're really internally focused. So are you really looking forward and outward? And can you prioritize those things that will put you in a position of strength in the future, as opposed to dwelling on a comparison of today versus history? I think has been really helpful for us. Really testing what impact is this going to have on us in the near and midterm, as opposed to what impact does it have on us today? Asking yourself the question, if we change this immediately, would it move the needle? It helps you kind of determine, like, is that just a pain in the butt, or is that a potential existential risk for the business?
So Jen, some people have commented on this period we're in right now serving as a real forcing function to accelerate things that we both believe are inevitable over the next decade. Do you think it is purely acceleration, or do you think other things are changing? I mean, what's your view on whether all the solutions are out there, all the tactics are out there, or will this crisis still lead to new innovation and discoveries that will be meaningful?
I think the pure length and the vastness of this crisis is going to change society forever and change the way we work forever. We are already seeing an acceleration in things that we thought would take a decade that are going to change in a matter of months or years. I think we've learned from working from home that in some ways, being cameras up in an environment like this, you can have a more personal engagement than maybe you do in a conference room with 12 people, because you can actually see everybody's facial expressions in tiles and compare and contrast the nonverbal response to stimuli. So I think we're learning a lot of, we're building a lot of new muscles, so to speak. I also have just found there's empathy in relationships where I didn't historically see empathy. And I know after our Q4 earnings call, the first part of the conversation with our analysts and our investors was very different. There was a general concern, personal concern for one another, and a shared curiosity and kind of collective discovery process to try and sort of figure this out for the better of the broader community. That's very different than what we've seen in the past. It was super encouraging. So some of these things, my dad always said, don't waste a good crisis. I'm sure that came from a much more famous person. In some ways, I think this crisis is, it's going to highlight our strengths. It's also going to expose our weaknesses. And the best companies are going to jump on those weaknesses and address them quickly. And then they're going to lean into those strengths in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of you talk about how certain things are changing in this distributed environment. One of the things that I've observed is that people are on time more often. So more people are showing up at the beginning of a meeting as opposed to dribbling in over time. The second thing is I feel like the personal connection has actually elevated in some cases. I did a new employee onboarding with 70 people last week. And guess what? I looked at everyone's tile. I could see their name. I could say Jen, as opposed to
Yes,
you in the red jacket, right?
exactly.
It's such a nice personal connection. And so again, there are these unintended positive consequences that come from some of this. And I think
Totally.
as we talk about how our perceptions have changed, I will say that my perception of work from home has changed. And I don't
Mine
think it
too.
will carry as much of a stigma when a portion of the team is dialing in from their home office. I think it'll be viewed as quite normal. It's so
I
fascinating.
agree. And I wonder, one of the things we've been talking about as a team is um, it's less effective when you have a camera in a meeting room staring at 8 faces than it is when every face has a camera, right? And so even thinking about the layout of our conference rooms and how we think about video engagement as people start to return back to work in phases is a question that we're working through in terms of what our new dynamic workforce will look like. I also think that our employees are demonstrating a real willingness to leverage the technology and tools that we're giving them and very quickly transition away from old habits, like very quickly. So when you find a tool that works, the ability to make that transition has definitely accelerated. And I think for me, I've always felt some guilt over the fact that the San Francisco community gets more exposure to me than our Toronto community or our UK community or our Sydney community, et cetera. And now I have the opportunity to level the playing field a little bit there because we're all engaging in the same way. So I actually feel like reach as a leader has improved by leveraging modern tools that we have today that we weren't using as effectively and as collectively as we used in the past.
So, Jen, one of the things I'm going to remember from our conversation today is this notion of forward and outward. And I love how that grounds one in not only thinking sort of ending the navel gazing, right, but looking at your customers and your partners and those other constituents and how to solve beautifully for them. And I think this focus also on pushing yourself to think midterm and long term in your decisioning. And really understanding the value and not trying to solve for the next 90 days, but solving for the multi-year opportunity. Those are things that I'll take away from our conversation today. And one of the things that I appreciate as a friend and in the community with you, I love your positivity, right? It is a grounded positivity, which I think is so important as you lead others. So thank you for that, Jen, and great job building your company and supporting your clients.
Well, it's my pleasure, Mark, and the feeling is mutual. We really appreciate your partnership. We use Smartsheet internally. We've leveraged your crisis management template that you shared early on in this crisis situation, and you and I have compared notes on many occasions, and I absolutely hope that continues. And to the extent that we can be helpful to you and your team in any way, we're always just a text or a video away.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jen.